Welcome to the debate. When historians approach a vast, complex archive, thousands of primary source documents, ledgers, handwritten letters, there is this deep expectation of absolute fidelity to the source.
Right. You don't just invent a narrative out of thin air.
Exactly. You build it painstakingly from the raw evidence. But today, we are asking what happens when you let artificial intelligence write that history for you.
Yeah.
We're diving into the living professional record, the LPR, and specifically, we're looking at the LPR Academy Module 3 guidelines.
Which, for those following along, define the strict architectural boundaries between a worker's private source data and their public professional profile.
Right. And the core disagreement we're tackling today centers on a very specific doctrine in those guidelines. The doctrine is AI assists, the human governs.
That's the one.
I'm going to argue that the AI translation log, which is a specific tool within this architecture, is a robust, airtight governance mechanism. I mean, it perfectly subordinates AI to human accountability.
Okay, well, and I will argue that relying on AI to summarize or translate or revise inherently delegates a degree of interpretive authority to the machine. I just believe that once you invite AI into the process, absolute human governance becomes this fragile, if not totally impossible, ideal.
Well, let me lay out my perspective on this first. The doctrine that AI assists but the human governs is operationalized perfectly through the AI translation log. We really have to remember that the living professional record is not a public profile.
No, definitely not.
It's not a LinkedIn page. It's not a resume. It is a private foundational source system. So when a worker decides to use AI to help draft a public-facing document, the AI translation log forces rigorous documentation.
Right, the tracking features.
Exactly. It explicitly tracks exactly when AI was used, what specific source material was fed into it, what output was produced, which claims were accepted, which claims were rejected, what privacy restrictions applied, and ultimately, what final rendering was approved.
Sure, the system records the metadata.
But it's more than metadata, because the log forces the worker to document privacy restrictions and human review notes right alongside those AI outputs. It effectively neutralizes the AI's known tendency toward, hallucination or inflated authority. It creates an impenetrable audit trail.
An impenetrable audit trail?
Yes, the machine might suggest language, sure, but the architecture guarantees that the public rendering remains strictly accountable to the source evidence. AI assists, the human governs.
Look, I see the structural appeal of that, I really do. But I come at it from a completely different way. I don't dispute that the tracking mechanism itself is rigorous. You can log every keystroke if you want to. But the doctrine explicitly states that AI does not decide the truth.
Right, which it doesn't.
But that premise is compromised the very moment AI is invited to translate, compare, shorten, or revise your professional language.
How so?
Because translation and summarization are not neutral math equations. They are inherently acts of interpretation. Even if a human meticulously approves the final rendering, that human is now reacting to an AI-generated framing of their career.
They're just reviewing a draft.
But they're not organically constructing the narrative from their own raw material anymore. The AI translation log might perfectly track the use of AI, I'll give you that. But it cannot fully prevent the subtle erosion of a worker's unique operational texture into, generic machine-friendly language. The machine is shaping the thought before the human even gets to govern it.
Okay, I think we need to break down the mechanics of the AI translation log for a second, because understanding how it works structurally is crucial to seeing why it protects the truth.
Go for it.
Let's use a mechanical analogy. Think of the AI translation log like a cleanroom airlock in a laboratory.
Okay, an airlock.
Yeah. On one side, you have your evidence vault. That's a secure digital folder where you drop the raw, messy realities of your job. An email thread where you saved a failing project, or a spreadsheet showing massive budget constraints. It's unpolished. It's the contaminated room.
Right, the raw data.
Exactly. On the other side is the clean room. The final polished resume bullet, or the interview answer. The AI translation log is the literal airlock in between. You can't just throw raw data through the door.
Because of the privacy labels.
Yes. You have to strip off the confidential data, apply privacy labels, and log exactly what is passing through. It acts as a firewall. Because of this, you never look at a bullet point on your resume 5 years later and wonder, wait, did I actually do that? Or did the algorithm just make it sound good?
Hold on. So you're saying the log acts as a literal firewall. But how does writing down, I used an AI tool, stop the AI from hallucinating in the first place?
It doesn't stop the hallucination. It catches it before it becomes the record.
Let's look closely at that airlock analogy, though. The LPR defines something called a project record, and this captures what we call operational texture.
Right. The situation, the stakes.
Exactly. The problem, the constraints, the real human stakes. If you insert an AI into that airlock between the project record and the final rendering, you introduce a black box.
It is not a black box if you track the input and the output. That's the whole point of the log.
It is a black box in terms of reasoning, though. If you're listening to this and you've ever pasted a messy project summary into an AI and thought, wow, it made me sound like a CEO, you know exactly the temptation we are talking about here.
Well, sure, it polishes things.
But the AI is making silent, opaque decisions about what context matters and what constraints to ignore just to output a polished paragraph. Let's say your evidence vault shows you inherited a failing project, your team was severely under-resourced, and you barely stabilized the situation to prevent a massive financial loss.
A common scenario.
Right. You feed that into the AI, and it reads that complex human struggle and spits out successfully managed project turnaround to completion.
Which is technically true.
Technically, it isn't a lie, but it completely strips away the stakes and the constraints that the context layer was designed to protect.
That is an interesting point, I'll admit, though I would frame it very differently. The AI is not acting as the final arbiter of meaning in your scenario. It is acting merely as a drafter.
A drafter with its own agenda.
Let's look at another analogy. Compare the AI to a junior legal clerk drafting a brief for a senior judge. The clerk, meaning the AI, may draft the language based on the evidence vault.
Sure.
And sure, the clerk might try to simplify the constraints, or they might make it sound overly polished because they lack experience. But the judge, the human worker, applies the decision and judgment log to review, edit, and ultimately sign it.
But a human clerk...
Let me finish this thought. The clerk does not own the judgment. The judge does. The guidelines are explicitly clear on this. AI may help render, summarize, translate, compare, shorten, or revise professional language, but AI does not own the record.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the legal clerk analogy holds up under behavioral pressure.
Why not?
Let me tell you why. A junior legal clerk understands human nuance. They understand ethical boundaries, the unwritten stakes of the courtroom, and frankly, they know they can be fired for lying.
Okay. Fair.
An AI optimization model is trained to generate plausible, confident text based on statistical likelihoods. It naturally gravitates towards generic, inflated language because that is exactly what corporate data sets and millions of public resumes are full of.
Which is exactly why the human is there to govern it.
But let's talk about the psychological toll of that governance. This leads us directly to the problem of inflation and erasure, which is a massive focus in the material regarding the contribution record.
Yes, the contribution record.
Work is almost always collective. Did you own the work, lead it, coordinate it, support it, or merely observe it? The source material gives a perfect example. The raw evidence might show, I supported implementation tracking.
Right.
You feed that into the AI. Because of its statistical training, what does the AI naturally want to write?
I led the transformation.
And that is exactly where the log separates what the worker did from what the AI attempted to invent. That's the governance. But think about the cognitive psychology here. Relying on an AI translation log puts an immense, exhausting cognitive burden on the human to constantly spot and reject these subtle inflations. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the anchoring effect.
I'm familiar with it.
When you are presented with a piece of information first, even if it's wrong, it anchors your subsequent judgment. If the human is tired,
if they are in a rush to apply for a job on a Friday night, or if they simply suffer from imposter syndrome and actually like how the machine makes them sound.
The inflation slips in.
Exactly. That inflation slips into the rendering. The log just becomes a rubber stamp. You're telling the human to fight the gravity of the machine every single time.
I hear your concern about cognitive load, but you are describing a failure of the human, not a failure of the architecture. And more importantly, I think you are entirely missing the counterintuitive brilliance of this design.
Brilliance? Okay, let's hear it.
We usually want technology to remove friction, right? That's the whole pitch of Silicon Valley. But in the LPR, friction is a feature.
Friction is a feature. Come on, how is being annoyed by your own tools a feature?
Because that annoyance is human cognition kicking in. You want it to be slightly difficult to accept an AI claim. Look at the specific requirements of the AI translation log. It doesn't just ask you to hit approve.
It asks for rejections.
Yes, it explicitly requires the documentation of claims rejected. Let's walk through the example provided in the module guidelines. A human uses AI to draft a resume bullet from an onboarding context note. The log requires them to document the outcome.
Right.
And the entry actually reads rejected transformed onboarding as overstated, accepted revised language, created shared onboarding checklist, and coordinated manager input to improve consistency.
Okay, but does documenting a rejection actually break that psychological anchoring effect?
Yes, because it forces a structural pause. The architecture of the log actively forces the human to be vigilant about accurate agency. It takes the AI's tendency to inflate, and instead of letting it slip by, turns it into a prompt for deeper reflection.
A prompt for reflection.
It asks the worker, hey, did you really transform this, or did you just coordinate it? This protects against invented claims, inflated authority, generic language, and unsupported renderings. The friction forces you to be honest with yourself.
Look, that friction is a feature for the highly conscientious worker. I will grant you that.
Thank you.
But we are talking about system architecture. Any system that relies on constant, high-friction vigilance against a tool designed to be frictionless is inherently unstable.
Unstable?
Yes. It's like putting a bowl of candy on your desk and telling yourself the friction of having to write down every piece you eat will stop you from eating it. Eventually, you just stop writing it down and eat the candy.
I don't think that's a fair comparison.
But wait, to even catch those inflations, the AI needs context in the first place. And here's the trap. You can't give it the real context because of confidentiality.
Ah, you're talking about the privacy layer.
Exactly. The privacy layer is perhaps the most problematic bottleneck in this entire governance model.
Bottleneck? It's a shield.
Let me explain. The guidelines strictly warn against uploading confidential, proprietary, employer-owned, or sensitive material into public tools. If I am working on a highly secretive merger or some heavily regulated client implementation, I cannot feed that raw evidence to an AI.
Which is a necessary protection. The full record is private by default.
It is necessary, absolutely, but look at the paradox it creates. To get a good AI rendering, to get that junior clerk to write a decent brief,
Right.
you have to feed it high-quality context. If your evidence is from a confidential project, the privacy label in the LPR dictates that it's redacted, metadata only, or strictly do not upload.
Yes, you withhold the sensitive parts.
So what happens then? If you can only feed the AI safe summaries or metadata-only notes to protect your employer's privacy, the AI cannot possibly generate a rendering that captures the true stakes of the work. You are feeding it a hollowed-out version of your reality, and it will give you a hollowed-out generic rendering in return.
Okay, but
You are structurally forcing the worker to starve the AI of the very context it needs to be a good assistant.
Let's unpack that for a second, because this is where the system actually shines. If the AI produces a weak, generic rendering because you withheld confidential data, what happens next?
The human receives a useless rendering and has to rewrite it from scratch.
Exactly. Which proves my point. The limitation of the AI's output is once again a feature, not a bug.
So the system works best when the AI is useless? That's your defense?
The system works best when the AI's limitations force the human to step up. The privacy layer is not a barrier to AI, it is a prerequisite for it. By applying privacy labels like public, shareable with care, redacted, or exclude before the rendering process even begins, the worker absolutely governs what the machine is allowed to see.
Sure, they govern the input.
And if the AI spits out a weak rendering because it lacked the confidential data, the human is structurally forced to manually synthesize the final output. The human looks at the AI's weak attempt, looks back at their private context layer and their private evidence vault, and crafts a rendering themselves.
Right.
They write something like supported documentation and stakeholder coordination in a regulated client implementation environment. The AI couldn't write that because it didn't have the confidential data.
Because it was starved of it.
But the human bridged the gap. That proves structurally that the human must govern the process. The AI assists where it safely can, but it is fundamentally subordinated to the privacy boundary.
That is a compelling argument in theory, truly. But have you considered the behavioral reality of software adoption?
What do you mean?
If the AI is consistently starved of context and produces weak outputs, the user will eventually do one of two things.
Okay.
They will either abandon the AI translation log entirely because it's just too much work, or, far more dangerously, they will start stripping away the privacy labels.
They'd be breaking the rules of the system.
People break rules for convenience all the time. Think about the listener who is desperate for a job. They will say, I really need a killer cover letter for this application. I'll just paste the confidential project details into the prompt this one time. What's the harm? The architecture basically creates an incentive to bypass governance for the sake of convenience.
But that's exactly why the LPR is structured as a private worker-owned source system rather than just a document folder on your desktop.
A folder doesn't govern you either.
Right. But the training pathway, the academy itself, is designed to teach evidence literacy before it ever teaches rendering. The module specifically states that privacy is not a later compliance step. It is part of the anatomy of the record.
Training doesn't always beat temptation.
If a worker violates their own privacy boundaries for convenience, they aren't utilizing the LPR system anymore. They are just reverting to the old, ungoverned way of throwing text at an algorithm.
And I maintain that the allure of the algorithm makes that reversion almost inevitable for many. The doctrine states, AI may help render, summarize, translate, compare, shorten, or revise, but AI does not decide the truth.
Exactly.
But think about what summarization really is. When you allow an algorithm to summarize a dense decision and judgment log, a log that captures all the trade-offs, the ethical boundaries, and the risks you weighed during a really hard project,
Yeah.
you are allowing the machine to decide what was most important about that judgment. That is a form of deciding the truth.
I don't see it as deciding the truth.
It is. The human might catch the most obvious errors, like a wrong date or an incorrect job title. But the subtle framing, the prioritizing of one constraint over another, that becomes the machine's truth.
I hear your concern about the subtle framing. And honestly, it's a valid fear if the AI translation log existed in a vacuum, but it doesn't.
No, it has the whole LPR architecture around it.
Exactly. The LPR has another structural mechanism to anchor the truth and to combat that exact subtle framing, the claim map.
Ah, right. Connecting the final rendering back to the evidence.
Yes, but it's more than just linking documents. The claim map explicitly connects the final public rendering back to the supporting evidence, the context note, the privacy boundary, and crucially, the witness and feedback layer.
The human element.
Let's define that for the listener really quickly. Not all evidence is stored in spreadsheets or emails. Some evidence lives in people, human beings who saw you do the work.
Right.
If an AI drafts a rendering that subtly inflates your leadership on a project, the claim map forces you to check that claim against the witness layer.
Right. The idea that a claim is only as strong as the person willing to verify it.
Exactly. You have to ask yourself, if a recruiter contacts the department manager who witnessed this work, will they support this specific phrasing? The machine doesn't know the manager.
No, it doesn't.
The machine doesn't have to look the witness in the eye. The human does. If the AI suggests you spearheaded the division overhaul, but your claim map requires you to link that to the manager who actually spearheaded it, the friction kicks in again.
The social friction.
Yes. You're forced to revise the claim down to reality before it ever goes public. The claim map keeps the rendering accountable to reality, completely bypassing the AI's interpretive spin.
Okay, the witness layer is indeed a powerful grounding mechanism. I will absolutely admit that.
It changes the dynamic.
It does. Because a witness is claim-specific, they cannot verify what they did not observe. If the AI invents a claim of led the strategy, the witness can easily say, no, they coordinated the meetings.
Exactly.
I will concede that a fully realized claim map, rigorously cross-referenced with human witnesses, provides a formidable defense against AI hallucination. The social pressure of a human witness is, frankly, far stronger than the digital pressure of a log.
So we arrive at a point of convergence. The AI translation log doesn't stand alone as just a checklist. It works in concert with the context layer, the privacy layer, the contribution record, and the claim map to create this incredible web of structural friction.
A web of friction, yes.
It forces the human to pause, to document, to reject, and to verify. It protects against those invented claims and privacy mistakes exactly because it refuses to let the AI operate in the shadows. AI assists, but the human governs.
Well, we do converge on the fundamental premise of the material, that the resume is just a rendering, that the record is the true source, and that ungoverned AI poses a massive risk to professional identity.
I think we definitely agree there.
Yeah, we both agree that blindly trusting an algorithm to define your career is incredibly dangerous. But where we still diverge is on the psychological tenability of that structural friction.
You still think it's too much load?
I do. You see the AI translation log and these airlocks as a perfect cage that keeps the algorithm in its place. I see it as inviting a very persuasive, very generic voice into your head and then asking you to spend the rest of your career arguing with it just to preserve your own truth. Ceding interpretive ground to AI, even with a log, makes the boundary between human reality and machine language incredibly porous.
It is a profound tension, and, I think it highlights why understanding the anatomy of professional memory is so critical right now. We are moving into an era where the temptation to let machines do all of our professional speaking is immense.
It's already here, really.
It is. The material we've discussed today, the living professional record and its various layers, it suggests that there is a way to harness the convenience of AI without surrendering our authority over our own histories. Friction is a feature because your career is worth the effort of remembering accurately.
There is certainly much more to explore in how these tools interact. For the listeners chewing on this, you really have to ask yourself, how does a worker maintain this system over time? How does the claim status guide, labeling claims as supported, emerging, or aspirational, how does that shift as a career evolves?
Right, it's a living system.
The listener will just have to decide for themselves if the human mind can truly maintain absolute governance when the machine is always offering a faster, shinier version of the truth.
Indeed. It brings us back to where we started. When you are the historian of your own life, sitting in front of that vast, messy archive of your career, you can let a machine write the generic tourist brochure.
Or
you can take on the hard, vital work of drafting the narrative yourself, using the tools to assist, but never to govern. The archive belongs to you. Make sure the translation does too. We'll leave it right there for today. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.